and that is on mute. On mute. I can't even speak. Speaking is so hard right now. I don't know why. I don't know why it's hard. Hi, all, and welcome to the first episode of the Such a Fun Read podcast. I am your host and resident reader, Cherie Lampley, and here we'll be diving in each week to talk about the books we love and how we deal with being book obsessed. And for this week's episode, we are going to be discussing To Be Read List, mostly monthly TBRs, whether or not they are worthwhile, and why I should probably give up on them. But before we get into that, I feel like I should probably introduce myself a bit. As I said earlier, my name is Cherie. I live in the Midwest, and I am obsessed with books. I love books. I love reading books. I love collecting books. Now, I do prefer reading to collecting, but I do have quite a bit of unread books on my bookshelf. So my to be read list is very long. It is very, very long. Like I said, I love reading and I love sharing the books I've read with other people, which is why I started my YouTube channel a few years ago, and also why I came back to my YouTube channel in 2023. But the problem is sometimes I get in my head and I can't figure out what type of videos I want to make for the YouTube channel. So I decided that making a podcast that will be all about my love of reading makes sense because one, I'll have consistency on making content, and two, maybe there are other like-minded people who don't have a lot of people in their life that read, and they may want someone to chat with about the books that they love to read. And that is what I'm here for. That is what I will be here for every week. Now, for the books I love to read, I love reading different genres, and I mostly read fiction. I don't read a lot of nonfiction, maybe every once in a while, but it is definitely mostly fiction. I read fantasy, science fiction, thriller sometimes, romance every once in a while. I read adult, young adult, middle grade, every once in a while. As for my favorite books, I have two favorite series. One is the Red Rising Saga by Pierce Brown. That is adult science fiction. And two is the All Souls series by Deborah Harkness. I love that series. I'm obsessed with that series. I guess it could be considered paranormal romance. It's in the general fiction section at the bookstore, so I don't know exactly what they try to deem it as, but I love it. I love it. And I will be doing a reread of that series this year because book 5 comes out in July. I'm really excited for it. And I know I mentioned earlier that I don't really read a lot of romance. However, if it does have some fantasy element to it, I'll pick it up. I will. So I did say that this is the first episode of the Such a Fun Read podcast. Technically, that's not true. I had attempted to start a podcast a few years ago, and it was pretty much me reading a book and then coming on to the podcast and then chatting about it. But the problem with that is when you have book slumps, what are you talking about during the podcast? But I wouldn't mind doing that every once in a while. If there's a book that comes out and we all want to talk about it, yes, we will talk about it on the podcast. Also, other things that we could talk about on the podcast are movie adaptations or TV show adaptations. I mean, the 3rd season of Bridgerton is coming out soon, right? We could talk about that. Now, that's a little bit about me and my reading and why I decided to start this podcast. So, TBR list. What do we think of them? I know a lot of people make them. I make them quite a bit. I actually have some books I will be talking about a little later because I have one for the month of February. I know I'm about to call myself out, but I do have a TBR list for the month of February that I haven't talked about yet. And I want to talk about it here. Also, disclaimer, I am not calling anyone out about making TBR lists, at least anyone besides myself. If you make TBR lists and you're able to stick to them, I envy you. I really do. But I haven't really publicly talked about a monthly TBR in a while now. I think August, because I did an August TBR and then I did a fall TBR. And guess what? I didn't really stick to either. The August TBR, did I even read one book? I may have read one book. I don't remember. I'd honestly have to rewatch that video. And then for the fall TBR, I may have read one as well. I really don't remember. This is why I don't really like creating them. And yet I have one. I'm a mood reader. So I don't know if other mood readers find it hard to make monthly TBRs or not to make them, mostly to stick with monthly TBRs, because I can make a monthly TBR. I can pick a bunch of books off of a bookshelf and just decide, hey, guess what? These are the 5 books I plan to read this month. Now, will I end up reading them? I don't know. That's the whole thing. Because a few weeks after I've pretty much chosen those books to read for that month, I'm probably not in the mood to read any of them. And that's what happened with my fall TBR. Now, when I created my fall TBR, it was a lot of spooky books. But here's the thing. This is something I've recognized about myself the last few years. And this is something I need to remind myself for this year. I start feeling the spookiness in August. And then around October 15th or 16th, that spookiness is gone. Maybe in the middle of August is when I'm like, yes, I'm ready for spooky. But something happens in the middle of October. I don't know if it's because I decided way too early to be into spooky things, but actually maybe even earlier, because last year I started reading like thrillers and horror books in like June. So that would make sense to me that by the time October rolls around, I'm kind of looking for something else. So that is definitely something I'm going to have to keep an eye on this year, so I don't ruin spooky season for myself, or at least plan it out better. I definitely think planning it out better would definitely work. I will give one positive, though, about monthly TBRs. It resets the month. It excites me about picking out some new books that I want to read. Whether I end up reading all of those books, I usually read at least 1 or 2. But it definitely gets me excited to read. So I guess that's a positive. And I guess I just shouldn't really care if I say I'm going to read these and then I don't end up reading them. I think it's because, I'm making this video and I'm saying I'm going to be reading these books, but then I don't read these books, and it's kind of like I lied to you guys. And it's not that I don't want to not care that I lied to you guys, because, is it really lying? I don't know. But I guess it's not really lying. These are books I want to read. And at that moment I created the TBR, I did want to read them then. So I guess it's not really lying. I'm glad we talked that out. I'm glad we did. Now the question is, will I continue to make monthly TBRs? Yes, maybe. I don't know. For this month, for February, I will be making a monthly TBR, and I'll go over the books that I plan to read here in just a moment. I guess it just depends on how I'm feeling. I'm leaning toward yes. I'm leaning toward yes right now, but it's everything. We will see how that goes. Now let's talk about the books I think I'm going to read in February. And for some reason, I have 7 books here. I read 3 in January. Well, I started another, but I didn't finish it. So I almost read 4, but I didn't finish it because I put it down. So the first book I have is House of Marion by J.L. This is the book that I plan to start reading first. I have yet to start it though. I know it is a young adult fantasy and they're debutantes, and on the back it says ball gowns and betrayal, magic and mystery, decadence and darkness. A forbidden love story. It's a modern day romantic fantasy series opener steeped in a deeply intoxicating world with forbidden love and a dark magic that could destroy it all. It also be my first fantasy of the year. Because I kind of read something that was fantastical. The next book is Interesting Facts About Space by Emily Austin. This is a book that I did start in January, but I put it down because the main character was getting on my nerves. But I am kind of interested in seeing what happens. So I might end up picking it back up, but I know our main character, she is very much into true crime. She listens to a lot of true crime podcasts, and she's also very interested about space, which I'm guessing you can get from the title of the book. And she like calls her moms and gives her interesting facts about space. And she's also kind of, I don't know, scared, frightened. I don't know the right word for it, but she doesn't trust people. I'll say that. She doesn't really trust people. And I don't know. She was kind of getting on my nerves. I think she thinks that someone is after her or following her. So I'm kind of interested to see how that goes. Hopefully she gets on my nerves less so that I can complete this one. I also have The Blood Gift by N.E. Davenport. This is a sequel to The Blood Trials, which I read a couple years ago, and I've been meaning to read this sequel because I have so many series that I own or that I've started and I have yet to finish. But this book is science fiction. I think it's kind of like a science fantasy. It is a duology, and that kind of makes me sad because I really like this world and I would love to read more in this world. But I should probably read this one to make sure that I still enjoy this world. I also grabbed The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. I own a bunch of Riley Sager books and I'm making my way through them. I've read 3 so far. I read Final Girls. I believe it's called The One Time I Lied. And then I read the one that they came out with last year, The Only One Left. I think that's what it's called. So I've read those and I'm just making my way through on reading the other ones. I've heard this is kind of like Rear Window at a Lake. Next, I have Emma by Jane Austen. So here's the thing. Here's a confession. And something else to know about me. I've only read one Jane Austen book, and that is Pride and Prejudice. I consider myself to be an Emma girl. I love Clueless. I love the Emma adaptation that came out in 2020. But I have yet to read Emma. And if I'm going to consider myself an Emma girl, I have to actually read Emma. I also have Reggie and Delilah's Year of Falling by Elise Bryant. I read Happily Ever After last year, and it was very, very cute. So I'm thinking it's February. I'm probably going to be in the mood to read something cute. Why not pick this up? And the last book I have is a book that is very long overdue for me to read, and that is Nine of Swords by Brooklyn Quintana. So this is a self-published author, and she actually sent me this book to read and review, and I just haven't had a chance to do it, but I have it. I have started it, and that is something I want to do. I haven't had a chance to do it. It's mostly because I'm a mood reader, and it's all about, am I in the mood to read this book? It's a fantasy. It's also a chunker. This is chaotic, but that's okay. But I think that's all for this first episode of Such a Fun Read podcast, and I really hope it is less chaotic than I feel like it was. But thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Such a Fun Read, and I will talk to you all again next week. Happy reading.